Today I'm going to show you this model fancy village. And as most of you have probably already noticed, the buildings and terrain aren't printed using any resin, they're printed using a thick cardstock paper instead.
Looking even closer, you'll see these buildings aren't even assembled using any glue, but using these clips instead, which are made out of the same cardstock as the buildings are. This allows me to assemble and disassemble the buildings on the fly. Great for storage or transportation, but also something that could be valuable if I ever be able to produce them on a larger scale using sheets like these turned into punch cards. That would make it so you don't have to manually cut out every wall and clip yourself. Instead, you'd be able to just punch it out and assemble. Now, before I get into more detail about this project, I'd like to tell you that this video is split up into two parts. In part 1, I'll go into the background and future I have in mind for the project, and in part 2, I'll get right into how you can print and assemble this entire village yourself for free. You don't even need a printer that can print on cardstock. I'll add all the files you need in the description down below and give you some tips on some alternative solutions as well.
When I first started working on tabletop content, I mainly spent my time illustrating top-down battle maps, something which slowly but surely rolled into working on tools for map making instead, designing art textures and assets that would allow anyone to build their own maps with my art, figuring out how to optimize this process as much as I could. When it came to building scenery, however, I never really saw a way for me to develop tools that would allow anyone to create a map on the fly like that. I was stuck in this mindset between papercraft and 3D resin printing. At the beginning of the year, however, I was contacted to work on this pop-up project. It gave me a chance to get back to the drawing board, building scenery, taking the time to really explore the 3D space and how to apply textures with everything I had learned in 2D. It was the first piece of the puzzle. The next piece came when my kids showed me this model of a praying mantis made completely out of cardstock punch-out cards that you could assemble on the fly, working with clips instead of glue, and with thick cardstock instead of paper. By no means a new discovery, but for me it really opened up some doors. I immediately got to working on my first model. This model specifically. Now, the model itself isn't perfect by a long shot. You'll notice that the rooftop isn't as sturdy as you'd like it to be. The clips even had to be rescaled while I was building it to keep it from falling apart. This rescaling things as I was going obviously also had some effect on the placement of other parts of the design, like windows being located too close to the edge here. One of the bigger issues that took me a bit longer to resolve was making sure that the ground level was as sturdy as the floors above it. Instead of having the ground floor be part of the terrain, I decided to integrate it into the structure itself, as I had with the upper floors of my buildings. This didn't just make my buildings a lot sturdier, it also allowed me to repurpose my terrain for random encounter maps as well. Just replace the buildings with some trees, and voila! You'd have this excellent crossroad encounter ready to go. Each building was an improvement to the one before it, resulting in this final building. This church right here features a tower that you can scale level by level. The idea was to include a staircase design that you could drop into each section of the tower, making it possible for minis to navigate the tower with style. The only issue was taking account into clips was a lot harder than I thought it would be. They aren't just on the floor of each section, but they are also on the sides of the walls and the staircase itself. I had been struggling with staircases before, having built one for the outside of my first building. That design originally was the same scale of my church staircase, but the issue was that it didn't allow for my minis to enter the space of those squares without falling down. That's why these ones were a lot wider and a lot bigger. For the church design, I had thought I could scale back down, as I would be working with platforms every 10 feet for my minis to stand on instead. It looked pretty great once I had them all set up,
But cutting these out by hand had been pretty miserable experience, so the fact that these didn't end up fitting inside the tower was sort of a relief, as it kept me from doing this over and over again for 2 more sets of staircases.
Outside of the issues with the staircase though, the church design was a massive step forward. It's even a lot sturdier than my previous designs, even though the floor plan is a lot bigger. You'll notice that popping off our main rooftop here, that it pops off rather smoothly. It also has a lower front roof and 2 side roofs that can pop out to the sides. Now, what's really special about this church is that it actually has 2 functions. It can serve as a building for your minis to explore and battle an evil cultist in, or when we detach the tower here, it can also be turned into a functioning dice tower. By designing little cardstock inserts for each level of my tower, you would be able to drop your dice in at the top and have them roll out of the front door here on the base. Using simple slanted slides for each section, making sure the ground floor slide would angle all the dice towards the door opening here. I had originally also designed walls to be placed at the base of the tower, making it so that there would be a little tray for your dice to roll into. It's something that still needs a little redesign to make it look completely right, but so far it works as I had designed it to, and I'm really pleased with the result on the first try. As most of you have probably noticed by now, I really love getting the most out of everything I design. Having these double-sided prints for my buildings was one thing. Now I obviously needed to get some double-sided prints for my terrain as well.
What's weird is that doing these prints for my terrain were some of the first prints I actually got to making of my latest battle map designs. I had been working on creating top-down assets for so long now, focused on getting quality brushes to work with, getting assets looking just right, that I never really taken the time to make any prints. This flip-side design for my terrain will feature the same building as I have for my grassy village design, but in an urban setting instead. All I have to do is make simplified floor plans of each of the buildings I want to feature and build my map around those as I went. It's something that could prove to be very interesting for the future use as well, releasing pre-made buildings people can build at home and then design their own battle maps to go underneath for whatever they need. I also like the idea of having pre-made files available, makes it so that you can adjust the buildings, floor plan and all, as much as you want, working from the base or using them as a reference to create your own. The only final thing I would love to be able to fix for the future of these projects is having a tool that bakes the shadows into the art directly instead of needing to touch them up by hand as I'm doing here. It's a very minor detail, but something that would severely improve the art people can create with these tools. The urban setting I ended up designing for my alternative map option is more of a showcase, of course. I think I would end up using my art for a second scene, an urban scene like this perhaps. I would probably not include the same points of interest, i.e. the church here, as a main feature on my map. Most people will probably not end up needing to explore interiors of certain buildings, and that is something I would play around with here. Reusing those buildings and now making them central to the plot and making exploration of those buildings key in this next scene. I think that's the way you get the most out of every design you make. Although I do love the church that is in the setup as well, where the building are more meant to be a backdrop of what is going on.
Once I had test printed out all these models, I really saw the potential that this project could have moving forward. Releasing them for free is the first step I'm taking to see if other people will agree.
Next to that, I have also turned all the artwork for these models into textures my patrons can use in a tool like Dungeon Draft to try creating their own buildings as well. If you'd be interested in getting access to those textures, think about supporting me on Patreon as well. It's what has made getting into side adventures like this possible, being able to work with other artists who can help me realize all the ideas I have next to my top-down projects. What I'd also love to be able to explore with these models is recreating scenery from popular franchises like Lord of the Rings or Studio Ghibli. Depending on how well this video is received, I could make another video that features one of those models, including the art like I did in this video, so you can build along with me. If you have any specific requests for a model, be sure to let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what you think would be an interesting build.
Now that we've taken the time to talk about the entire process of building these models, we can finally move to part 2 of this video and actually start building these models ourselves.
As mentioned, all the files you need are included in the description below the video. I've made sure to include both files that are ready to print on A3 cardstock and the art assets one could use to print on paper. For folks who want to build these designs on paper, I suggest going down one of two roads. Either you print them as pieces you can cut out and glue to something sturdier like foam or cardboard, or you piece them together in one single file set up as a papercraft cutout. You can basically follow along with the boxes I will assemble as a single piece with my clips using paper flaps instead. By importing the files into Photoshop, you might need to change some of the pixel sizing to match your document. You can create these papercraft files as such. The height of every level is 2.5 inches and the length of each facade is always measured in inches. This one is 5 inches and 6 inches wide. You simply place them next to each other and have the bottom design attached to one side. The bottom I'm doing here for this quick design is going to face downwards. So you should have the floor attached to your interior walls, of course. For printing on the flip side of this paper, the bottom you add here doesn't really matter. It'll be face down. And then you simply need to attach the flaps on all connecting sides. If this was the interior, you need to make sure you copy paste whatever flap it will be attached to so it doesn't have a blank or white flap glued on top of it. You simply need to copy paste the section from the wall it gets pasted on. You can obviously also build these buildings as a single papercraft house. For my prints, I'm using an Epson printer that can print on 1.3mm cardstock. It's a model ET8550 if you'd like to know exactly what I'm working with. It allows me to stick in cardstock cards in the back of my printer to feed them all the way through. Each sheet is printed on both sides, and most buildings require between 2 to 4 sheets each to assemble. I made sure to print each building separately so I don't mix up any clips once moved to cutting them out. The next step, if you're following along with my cardstock build, is the roughest one. Cutting up a couple of these sheets by hand is pretty doable, but when you're in process of figuring things out and needing to reprint several sheets for particular builds, it can become quite a venture. There is a reason I have actually stayed away from crafting in the past and have chosen to stick with methods that don't require too much precision, like gluing small parts together. I always end up wanting to rush little things or lose focus and end up making a mess of things. You should see the pile of cutouts I had accidentally poured a cup of tea on as I was working on this build. Yeah, that was about 3 hours of work down the drain. Here's to a future in machine-made punch-out cards for this project. Once we've cut out all the pieces, we make sure to gather our clips based on their function. I've got my 4 base types of clips, which I'll introduce putting together my base model building here. And a couple of exceptions I'll get to once we return to our church model. First, we've got our floor clip. This clip is designed to slide all the way up into the wall section on the ground level of our buildings. It lifts the floor plan off the ground by a couple of millimeters, so that the wall themselves are level with the surface you place them on. These pieces have a long and short slot section that you need to identify before sliding them in. The long section is supposed to slide into the wall slot, and the short one into the floor slot. Just like our floor clips, our corner clips here also feature a long and short section. They are harder to identify, so that's why I placed a little L marker on the long section. To identify which wall section is the longer one, simply place your wall section next to your floor plan. If the floor plan is the same length as the wall section, this is the short end. And if your wall section is longer than your floor plan, you've managed to find the long end. Once you've outfitted your base walls with both clips, you can slide your wall pieces into place.
I would suggest to always work from sliding a wall piece into a floor piece. The third type of clip is the exact same clip as our floor clip, but this one is a variant that has the same design with a little added extension so that when the level is finished, it can be placed on top of the walls of another building level, sliding it right on top of the walls of the level below it. The final type of clip is the rooftop clip. Now, for my latest design, I often work with a combination of wall clips that you can slide into the ends of your rooftops and basic roof clips that you'll slide into the middle of the roof for reinforcement. Now, if we get back to our church design here, you'll notice that I'm working with two unique clip designs that I put together for the wing section of our church. To build these expanses, we need to identify two clips, one long and one short, that will slide into the arch of our building. If you do manage to mix them up, it'll be easy to identify any mistakes as the clips will be sticking out further than the base of the arch. It should slide in all the way, like it did on our floor clips. Once both clips are inserted, we can attach our wall section to the side. Putting together the rest of our church all boils down to using the base clips, just as I'm doing here on the front section. The church does have two clips for walls, just because I wanted to make sure that it was reinforced as possible. I'm still figuring out the right amount of clips I need for each section. Started with as little as possible on my first building. Now I might need to tune it down back a bit when it comes to these latest buildings. The type of cardstock used will also make a pretty huge difference. I'd love to get it made in a professional setting. I've played around with some cardstock that was a lot sturdier than mine here, even though it was the same thickness. Overall, these designs are really sturdy though, and can really carry quite the weight, no matter what scale of mini you place them on top of. The side roofs, for instance, are a really tight fit and are excellent for scaling in game if you'd like to place your minis on top. While we are putting in the floor clips on the base level of our massive church, you'll notice that just like my terrain sheets, most buildings also come with an alternative interior option printed on the bottom. Most of my buildings have been designed so that you can flip them if you'd like to reuse them later on, or for those of you who'd like to add a custom 3D furniture, like I added some custom 3D trees on my scenery. I really like the 2D interior design for mine just because it works really well when you're playing with miniatures. If you have too much clutter in the space you'd like to play in, it can become quite challenging to keep all the loose 3D clutter in place. Once we've moved from the buildings, I have one final model that is included in this village design, and that is the bridge. It's one of those that has been through several redesigns, having to figure out what would be the best way to approach it. Finally, I ended up using 3 simple clips that you could slide into the wall section of the bridge. A centerpiece that would keep the floor panel raised and sturdy, and 2 side clips that would slide in on either side of the wall. The floor plate itself has a series of knife cuts on the base so that the cardstock can bend to slide into the wall section on both ends. There's quite some tension on the wall sections, so that when sliding them in you need to bend them a bit to make sure it slides in on both ends. Once you manage to do so and clip in the centerpiece, you've got a really simple and sturdy bridge you can place your minis on. In my original designs, I had placed a bunch of clips all along the interior, making it really difficult to place minis there. With this very simplified design, those clips are no longer an issue. It's some really small pieces like these ones that really tie the scenery together in my opinion. It's also an excellent piece to have for random maps. Adding in a little river with a bridge is always a great way to spice up an encounter. Well, I think that's about it for this video. If you have any questions or suggestions, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to keep exploring designs like these, but it'll depend on how well this video is received and if people are actually even interested in building along with me. If you do like what you see, be sure to follow me here or drop by my Patreon where you can support creations like these directly. Thanks for watching and see you next time.